Please join me in giving a warm Georgia Tech welcome to Mr. Rohit Malhotra.
Cool. At any point, if you hit buzzword bingo, you win. Yay. Awesome. Go Tech. Thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Rohit Malhotra, and as the introductor told you guys, I'm the director for the Center for Civic Innovation. So I want to start off with an image here. This is an image in India. And in India, there are a number of workers, particularly in low-income villages, that time and time again are working and working and working and never getting paid for it. And what happens way too often is when they go to, in order to get paid for your services, somebody comes up to you and says, all right, well, just give me your fingerprint, because a lot of folks in this particular village are illiterate. They put their fingerprint on there to say that they received their payment, and then the transaction is done. And there was a whole village in Andhra Pradesh that said, wait a second, we're not getting paid. This is super weird. What's happening? And through India's Freedom of Information Act, which was passed, a group started saying, wait a second, something's not adding up. And there was a guy who went to a particular polling station of somebody who actually checks off all of these things, and he grabbed the sheet in which everyone checks off and signs off with their fingerprint. And what they found was that there was just dung, just crap, placed as fingerprints for each and every one of them, and folks were pocketing the cash, and people weren't getting paid. But I mean, they weren't able to organize and figure out how do we actually fight against something so corrupt, a system that we don't know how to fight, information that we're not necessarily given. And to make a long story short, a group started creating data walls. This is one of the coolest projects I've seen. Is they literally, that is a Excel spreadsheet on a wall, painted by people, showing who was supposed to get paid, for what, when, how much, and whether they got paid or not. And what started to happen is these public shamings would occur, where government officials were invited in, and people would say, you actually didn't pay so-and-so. They would say, you're right, I didn't, and they would hand over the money publicly. And it was a really incredible movement that started to take over a lot of these villages, and now there are hundreds and hundreds of these walls across villages, not only in India, but around the world, where people are sharing information and actually providing transparency into a process that has been corrupt for so long. And I say that to make one thing super clear here. Open data is not a tech issue. It's absolutely not. And if that's what your mindset is, I want you to wash that out of your mind. Because open data is a human issue. For so long, it's been whoever has the data has the power. And in a village like that, the folks who had the data had the power to collect the money when they felt like it and pocket the money that they felt like. And a lot of that is changing. So this is very much a human issue. So I just wanted to preface that for what I'm going to talk about today. So what is this whole open data thing? Well, as I stated up there, my parents think it's just what keeps our texting bill from going up every single month because my sister has a problem. But in definition, what a open data policy is and what open data really is, it's centered around these three different things. One is that there's information that can be freely used. Number two, that it can be reused, so not just used once and then it goes away and it's on a piece of paper, but people can use it again and again and again. And that it can be redistributed, that I can give it to another person or another department or another system, and it would be able to know exactly what I'm talking about. That's what open data is by definition. So who cares? Well, there's a huge reason to care. The first is what I just talked about, which was literally a bullshit issue, where there was a public transparency problem and an anti-corruption campaign that was built out of it. The second big reason is that there's a huge business opportunity around open data. When I say a huge opportunity, I'm talking about trillions of dollars. The third piece of this is that we actually have the opportunity to make our cities better. And that's an opportunity that we can't forget, especially in the information era. So I already talked about the transparency issue, and I don't want to harp on it too much. But there are huge businesses and businesses that are built on the backs of open data. GIS mapping came from the Department of Defense. We have the Weather Channel is built completely on open government data. You have a company like Zillow that has been giving information about how much a property sold for or what its value actually is over time, all built on open data. Brightscope is a $1 billion company that was built just by showing people how they can use their 401k or what 401k plans are offered within different companies. These are all companies that have found a free source and have begun charging people to actually get that information. And so McKinsey put out a report that this is a $3 trillion industry. That if we're able to tap into information that's just not getting to people, that there are businesses up to $3 trillion that can be built. And these are just a few of the examples. But the real opportunity here is less about building the $1 trillion business. That's awesome, and that's great. And NYU just put out a, it's called the Open 500 Index. And if you look at it, you could see 500 different companies across the United States that have been built off of open data, which is pretty exciting and kind of cool. But the big opportunity for open data is how can we actually start to make our cities better? And why aren't they already, if open data is so powerful and it has the ability to do so much, why aren't people doing it? Why is it not happening today? And the first is really that struggle between who has the information. So when, you know, in the early days of the United States, there were presidents who would actually go out and write down weather reports on pieces of paper and record that. We have mass amounts of information on how weather reports were made in the early 1700s and early 1800s. And today, those weather reports are made public to folks pretty easily. You can go to weather.com, you can go anywhere you need to find that information. But now, where government used to be known as this center for where innovative ideas, innovative thoughts, really cool new things would come out of the internet, or come out of government. Al Gore says he invented the internet, right? So we know that that came out of there. But there used to be a time when we turned to government to be innovative. But now, when we're looking for flying cars, we still have horse and buggies. So what happened? Well, number one, government doesn't have all the information anymore. A lot of that information, as we have encouraged entrepreneurship, encouraged the building of really big entities and companies, a lot of that information is living there, and now they're selling it to the government, which is a huge transformation on where power used to live. The second thing is that local governments and public agencies and nonprofits don't have the infrastructure to actually hold all of this data and information. You can go to some agencies right here, and they are still writing everything by hand, putting it in a filing cabinet, and hoping that it gets to the next person. And the worst part is when you're dealing with a big government agency, and even if this was the federal government, that information is done differently in each agency and each department. So agency X is collecting data and information in a completely different way and on a completely different system than agency Y. And they can't talk to each other, which seems insane. It just doesn't seem like that's what we should be doing, right? So there's an outdated way on how public agencies collect and store and use information. So that's one other huge factor that causes a barrier to innovation. The third, which I find to be more and more true as we meet with more and more people, is a fear of failure. A lot of people, there was somebody who came in today and said, you know, I'm not scared of the red tape. I'm not scared of, you know, the hoops that I got to jump through. I'm scared of what people are going to think. I'm worried that if my public agency spends tax dollars on trying something new and it doesn't work, we won't get elected again, or I'm going to lose my job. And there's this inherent fear of failure within public organizations. And we're finding it time and time and time again. So that's become a huge barrier where it's been difficult to ask public agencies to say, hey, try something new. Hey, look, here's a really great idea. Or why don't you create an open data portal? It's taken years for people to even start putting their information on data.gov, which was created, you know, years ago at this point by Vivek Kundra. So there's just not a process right now where folks can feel comfortable to say, well, this information is technically public information. I should be giving it to folks, but I'm scared what they're going to think. And that's led to a city like Atlanta being voted again and again as the least transparent city in the country. So that's a problem. The next piece is something that I think is being adopted more and more, but is one of the big policy pieces that we forget to think about. And that's that open data is not a standard. It's not that you have to do it. At the end of the day, I just want to make sure information is somewhere, that you're getting the job done, but you're not obligated, a public agency is not obligated to provide that information in a particular format. Now, a company like Brightscope, which, you know, took 401k data and made it and is now using it to actually sell a product, they had to kick down agency doors by issuing freedom of information requests. So you could fill out a weird old piece of paper and you can give a freedom of information request to an agency and they'll get back to you eventually because they have to. But it takes a lot of time to get that information. A lot of times people will say, when you talk to public agencies, say, I don't even know where that information lives. I have no idea where to even start. And sometimes the response is, well, we can get you that information, but we have to hire 2 people to go and find it. And that's scary, that there is not an easy way where you have mass amounts of information. It's just not being shared, only because they feel that they don't have the infrastructure to do it. So open data is just not a standard policy. There are some cities now that have said, all right, we're mandating all agencies must, all data after this particular date must be shared in this particular format. And that's something the city of Atlanta is not there yet. And a lot of cities are not there yet. But there is standards that are going in place in other cities that are working and helping build really cool things. And the last is obvious. There's just not money. And as much as, you know, we like to believe that there is a lot of money in local governments, they're broke. A city like Atlanta actually depleted its reserves. They were getting into the red where they didn't know if folks who were working for the government were even going to get paid or not. So to ask them to create this, essentially a department of failure, to go and experiment and try things was out of the question. So there are some real barriers. And it's not that government or public agencies are like, well, we hate working with people. We don't want to serve people. We like the way we're doing things. It's more that it's hard. It's really a culture shift within an industry that's been around for a really, really long time. But especially after a huge financial crisis, folks said, well, what do we do? Well, the way to, when your budget is tight, what do you have to do? You have to cut programs. Now, everything I just said leads up to this point. So if you have to cut programs, how do you decide which programs to cut? Well, either you can have enough data and information to say, this is working, this is not working, the pile of stuff that's not working, let's start trimming that. But in order to do that, you have to have that infrastructure in place that allows you to say what's working and what's not working. The state of Washington has an institute called the Washington State Institute of Public Policy. And they actually are an independent agency that evaluates data on social programs and spits out that information so that folks who are actually working in government are able to say, this is working, this is not working. But most cities don't have that. So the way they actually start to trim and cut programs is a gut feeling. You say, well, I made a promise to this guy. That person is kind of cool. I don't really know about that program. That's a little weird. So I'll just cut that. And we're making arbitrary cuts. And that's affecting people directly. If we're not making decisions at a local government level based upon good data, then what are we doing? A lot of the data is so outdated that if you made a decision upon, with that data, you'd actually be coming to many of the wrong conclusions. So it's a really scary thing where after budgets were cut at the city level, folks just started cutting social programs. And then they said, well, how do we actually go about funding these social programs now? How do we go about making sure that we're at least fulfilling our obligation for what government is actually supposed to be doing? And in came a really interesting mechanism that I happened to be in the administration at the same time this was launched. You had a private company, Goldman Sachs, came in and said, I could do that. We know how to, you guys have a problem with folks who get out of jail, keep going back, get out of jail, keep going back, get out of jail, keep going back. We know how to do that. We're used to people going in and out of jail. So they said to the city of New York, you're losing a ton of money because you're having to fill all of these beds with folks who got out, came back in, got out, came back in. What if we actually put some money in the game? What if we put, let's say, 10 million bucks in the game, and we funded some middle agency that would actually has awesome programs that keep folks out of jail? If we actually make that bet and we keep people out of jail over this extended period of time, then you pay us if we do that. And the only way that the city actually saves money is when you actually get to close down a wing of a jail. So if you take away a bed, that wing is still open. So you still got a warden that goes up and down. You still got a lot of maintenance that needs to happen. But at the end of the day, when you close down a wing, you actually save money. So that was the bet. Goldman Sachs said, we'll take that bet. We think we can reduce it faster than you've been able to. And you know what? You don't pay us unless we actually do it. Really interesting. And it was a model that was originated out of the UK and came to the US and just happened to, it was what I was tasked with and the team that I was on. And that was crazy because we saw this headline right as I was leaving, and it worked. That was crazy. We actually got Goldman Sachs to make a bet on a city program, and they're going to get paid only if they keep people from going back to jail. Now, I'd love to say that this is some sort of amazing miracle story that was just so amazing, and the good-hearted people in the investment industry decided to come around and give back to the community. But, you know, I would be lying to you. So the way it worked out is Goldman Sachs was like, yeah, we'll take that bet. But I don't know about this whole don't pay us anything thing. We're not willing to take that much of a risk. And you had, you know, two people who were good friends at Goldman Sachs and the city who were actually going back and forth on this conversation. I don't know if we're going to make that that kind of risk. And with a fear that it was going to fall apart, Mayor Bloomberg came in and said, I got money. I can put some stake in the game. So Bloomberg Philanthropies actually became a loan guarantor for the entire deal. So what does all that mean? All that means is that Goldman Sachs was going to retrieve back out of the 9.6 million bucks that they put in. They were, no matter what, going to retrieve back $7.2 million of that, regardless of if the program was successful or not. And what that showed us is that, yeah, getting investors to care about stuff is cool, but they're not going to take all of the risk. So how can city governments who really want to solve a social problem actually get them to take that risk when they don't have any money to offer? So this thing the deal is still being evaluated. We don't know how effective it's actually been. We're looking at it. But what we know is happening is that you have an intermediary, which in this case is MDRC. You have an intermediary that started to solve social problems with some private capital that yielded looking at yielding a direct benefit to a government. And that's a really interesting principle, and a lot of people thought that this is the game changer. This is the way you take some private capital and you can start solving social problems with that capital. And a lot of other cities said, I want in on that. I want to try that. So New York City tried it around recidivism. The program is still going. As I mentioned, MDRC is the intermediary that's actually providing the service of keeping folks from going back to jail. Goldman Sachs is putting the capital in, and the city of New York will pay as they actually save money. And so we're going to find out whether Goldman Sachs can actually save them a bunch of money. But that didn't stop a lot of other cities to say, I want to try something too. In the state of Massachusetts, they put the same arrangement together around chronic homelessness. And the really interesting thing about the chronic homelessness piece was that they don't have a Mayor Bloomberg. They didn't have somebody to come in and say, I'll put my own capital to actually back this deal. But what they were able to do was they passed a piece of legislation that said we're willing to put the full faith and credit of the state on the line as the loan guarantor. So they actually put their own credit on the line to make sure that the investor would actually get paid back. So that's a really interesting model that has started to take off as well. Chicago just announced one around early childhood education. And the one in Fresno is really cool. There were Fresno, California is one of the leading cities where there are massive amounts of asthma attacks. And asthma attacks we're finding by looking at a lot of the data are preventable. We can actually look at data and say, this is an area where there's a heavy amount or a heavy chance of you having an attack, and we can actually give people that information. And app after app after app has been created to do that. And what they're trying to explore is in Fresno, could they actually make investments in these preventative types of methods and create a social impact bond around it? Is there a private investor that would take that bet? And then actually, if the number of asthma attacks are reduced, they would get paid back. So again, it's pay if it works. So really interesting things happening around the country around those things. So what I started to do was look at, so what is the recipe for success in this pay for performance piece? Why does this work? Why do people care? What really makes, where's the meat of what we're talking about? And number one is that what you have to have, which we have no shortage of, is a struggling public agency that has limited capital. And we have that in almost every city around the world. The second thing is that you need to have a comprehensive, you need to have a database that holds data in a comprehensive way and that that data is usable and it's open. Because the way the deals are set up is somebody's got to save money. So if the city of New York doesn't save money, they don't want to pay. And the crazy thing about the Massachusetts deal was that even if homelessness goes down, it's not necessarily the housing authority that saves money. It could actually be the HHS services save money. It could be a federal agency that saves money. So there's multifaceted parties at stake here where a lot of different people can save money. So who's supposed to pay up the savings? That's a huge complication in the whole process. And if you don't have good data and you don't have an open data policy, it's impossible to actually measure whether something worked or it didn't, which is why so many cities struggle to actually get these things off the ground. And what you also need is people who actually have products or services that are making their cities better, that they problem solve at low cost, high efficiency. You need to make sure you have a market of that in order for these types of things to be successful, for pay-for-performance types of contracts to be successful. So it didn't take me long to see that there's a place that has that, and it is a place that I call home. It's a place where I learned to play basketball. It's a place where I listened to hip-hop since I was a kid. It's a place where one of my best friends is here today. Like, people who I grew up with are in this room. I came back to the city, and I saw all of that. I saw a city that's just falling apart. We have an income inequality gap that is the same of Ghana and Haiti. It's such a huge gap between the rich and the poor here. We literally live in a tale of two cities. So it's scary because as this city is growing on one hand, you have another huge population that has an upward mobility of only 4%. That means there's a 96% chance that you're going to be an adult in the same economic circumstances that you were in when you were a kid. And it's easy to forget that because we have so many beautiful buildings here, we have so many successful companies here, but there are some streets in this city, you can look left and you see a beautiful, beautiful hotel, you see those high-rises, and you can look to your right and the city's falling apart. That's a problem. So it didn't take me long to realize that there's actually an opportunity in the city I call home, Atlanta. And so this city is actually filled with very talented people. In fact, those talented people are sitting to your left and sitting to your right. We have products, we have skills, we have the ability to actually move the needle forward for the city. Yet, the way the entrepreneurial ecosystem within Atlanta is structured is very similar to our geography. You drive in 6 different lanes, you never intersect with one another, no one's ever talking, and it's easy to go from point A to point B without ever having to talk to somebody. That's a problem. We have to change that. Collaboration is the most important piece of bringing an entrepreneurial system to life. And we have every ingredient here, so we need to ask, what are we doing to actually bring this place to life? So we built something. We said that we actually want to create a home for social entrepreneurs in the city. That there are groups of people who are actually making a dent in the problem, who said enough is enough, the income inequality is not okay with me. Some of these folks grew up in Atlanta, some of them have transplanted to Atlanta, but all of them see the value that this city has. So we built a pretty awesome team, and in September we put a flag up. We said, entrepreneurs, where are you? And we had over 500 people respond and say, we're right here. And those folks were not necessarily entrepreneurs. They didn't necessarily go through business training and go through all of the fancy things that come with being an entrepreneur. In fact, I grew up in a home of entrepreneurs where my dad, was a true entrepreneur. Have you all ever seen those little nutshells? You open them and there's a little bug inside wiggling. You ever seen that? My dad invented that, which is kind of cool. Got me through college, so not bad. But my dad wasn't obsessed with wooden shells and little bugs. My dad had a gut feeling inside of him that said, this is a problem. I'm not going to live in poverty for the rest of my life. That my circumstances are in my control and I'm going to do something about it. My parents fought as entrepreneurs. They would never call themselves that. In fact, I don't think they even know what that is. They think I went to law school. So there is a huge, huge divide between folks who are entrepreneurs and trying to problem solve and folks who are problem solvers that just need to be entrepreneurs. And that's what we do. We take subject matter experts like my dad. We take farmers, teachers, lawyers, doctors, folks who have spent their entire life trying to solve a problem. And we cultivate them to the point where they can actually get the business skills that they need to enter a pay-for-performance contract. So we saw an opportunity within this city. The first was that this city has struggling public agencies. Agencies that spend tons of money on a problem, yet the problem keeps increasing. They're not paying for what works. The second thing is that folks aren't participating in the process. So we actually have a disengaged community, and our voter turnout levels are as low as they were since World War II. Folks don't go out and vote. They don't think it's important, or they just couldn't get to it, or they actually think that their voice just doesn't matter anymore. We saw that as a huge fundamental piece of solving this problem. And the third is that you have these public agencies, you have this thriving group of entrepreneurs, but they're not talking to each other. So we created an opportunity and a bridge. And that bridge is what the Center for Civic Innovation actually is. And so our mission is to improve the efficiency of public organizations and to increase civic participation, because we think those are the two pieces that are fundamental in getting a city to thrive again. So the way currently people get paid for social services in the city of Atlanta and around cities around the world is you have donors, or you have a tax base, or you have investors that pour money into a nonprofit, or it goes to local government, and those folks are charged with solving a social problem. So I give my tax dollar to this, a percentage of it goes toward actually going toward homelessness programs, or going toward this type of social program, or that type of social program. And then that service is delivered to the residences. But here are the problems here. Number one, we don't give our tax dollars based upon what's working, right? We don't get to fill something out and say, well, that's dumb, that didn't work at all. I don't want my money going to that. We don't get to do that. Neither do foundations per se. They don't necessarily, they'll give you the grant based upon your pitch, the way you present yourself, whatever it may be, but here's your money and stay away from me because I don't want to know whether it worked or not. And you have a nonprofit sector and a local government sector that's not required to actually report whether things are working or not. Some do, but they're not required to. And residences are getting the brunt end of the deal. And then they're saying, well, I'm not going to engage in the process because I don't even know what's happening in my local government. So the Center for Civic Innovation does three major things. Number one is that we host a physical space for conversations to get people re-engaged in the process. So when Ferguson happened, a lot of folks said, well, we're ready to protest. I'm ready to go, fired up. We came to underground Atlanta, the historic part of the city, and protested. And that's their right, and always should be. But we said there's got to be something more we can do to move the dialogue further. There can't just be the protesters and the not protesters. So what we did was we actually invited everyone in, gave them a pen and a piece of paper, and we said, write a letter to your city council member. Of course, what was everyone's question? Who's my city council member? And it was a really interesting moment for us to see that folks are also not given the information about what the process actually looks like and what it actually is. So the next day, or a few days later, we brought together 2 police officers and 2 attorneys, brought them into a room to talk about the legal process that goes behind an event like Ferguson. What is the grand jury process? So let me ask you a question. How many of you know who our governor is? If you could raise your hand. The governor of Georgia, you're familiar with it. You can raise them high, it's cool, we can participate, this is great. Look, I'm young, you're young, this is great. How many of you, keep your hands up. So how many of you know who our city's mayor is? Okay. How many of you know who your state representative is? Okay. How many of you know who your city council member is here at Georgia Tech, in the Georgia Tech area? Still got one. How many of you know who the district attorney is? For the state. You can see the numbers dwindling down. It's scary. Because when we asked folks who said, I'm fired up, I got a problem with what's going on, I'm so upset, they weren't able to actually point to the person who was actually elected to determine how that process would actually play out. So folks aren't voting in local elections. They don't know who the people are that are actually representing them. And in fact, and we found people who were on our own team that didn't even know the district attorney position was an elected position. They thought it was appointed, which is not a foreign thing. We have a very complicated process here. So a part of what we've started to do is to educate folks about this is what our process looks like. The city of Atlanta has the oldest form of civic engagement. We have a neighborhood planning unit that actually makes decisions on how a city looks, feels, and is built out. Yet if you ever have gone to a neighborhood planning unit meeting, nobody's there. Nobody's talking. It's all procedure. And that has to change. The second thing we do, beyond just getting people together to talk about these issues and educate them about what's going on, the second thing we do is we provide business and development courses to help you figure out, do you really need to start a nonprofit to make the impact that you're trying to do? In fact, where do you actually earn your income? Do you have a model that works? Now what's happening is that if you don't have a model that's actually generating any sort of income, foundations are pulling out. They're saying, we don't want to fund you. We don't want to be your support system. We're kicking you out of the house. You got to go get a job. And that's really, really a tough thing for the philanthropic community to swallow. So if you're thinking about an idea and you have something in your mind and maybe something was sparked, an open data idea, I think it's really important for us to look at how do we actually develop it into an investable business. And the third piece of what we do is facilitate these pay-for-performance contracts between entrepreneurs and public organizations through a process that we've called Civic Labs. So it all goes back to the social impact bond model where there was a private investor that said, I'm willing to give money to a city and then we can maybe collectively reduce this. But we're talking about $10, $20 million deals. What we're saying is actually what you could do is get a private investor or a philanthropy that's local, give a $20,000 to $50,000 stake of money to an entrepreneur that can build a really cool solution to drive down costs and actually engage more people and create a new innovative approach. You could actually do it that way. And then when the city saves money, they can pour all of that money back into a pool called a social impact fund. So there's a lot of different ways that we can go about finding innovative financing for social work that doesn't have to be $10 million deals. In fact, we need to grow the ecosystem of entrepreneurs so that we can say we have folks who can solve this problem better, faster, stronger. So I just wanted to say that, really. I'm going to get, and I want to say why I feel that way. I'm going to just flash that up there. Hackathons are really stupid. And here's why they're stupid. Because we've given organizations and public organizations an excuse to get free work over the course of 48 hours, not pay anything for it, and then complain about it when the outcome wasn't what they thought it would be. And who's actually filling the room with those hackathons? Who's sleeping and eating that crappy pizza? It's y'all. Y'all are doing it. And that's what's happening, is that we've incentivized that as innovation. That's become how you can be an innovative government or an innovative public agency, is host to say, I have a problem, solve it for me in 48 hours. Go, great, you got a cool solution? I'm not going to support it at all. And that's ridiculous. Like we just can't go about problem solving in that way. So we've actually said our Civic Lab model is not going to go and just give you this quick grant or $200 prize. What instead we're going to do is we're going to give entrepreneurs a customer. We're going to say there's a group of people with ideas, products, and services that want a customer. When you talk to entrepreneurs, they don't want debt. They don't want you to take their equity. They want somebody who's willing to pay for the thing that they're building. And what we've been able to do is through the pay-for-performance contract model, is to say at the end of it, you'll be paid upon the actual outcomes that you achieve, you'll get a customer, and we'll actually reduce the risk for investors and local governments to enter those types of agreements by leading you through those business development skills, vetting you, getting you to the point where you're investment ready. That's going to be the game changer here. Every single accelerator or every single program in the country that does this type of work is offering you either debt, or they are taking equity, or they're giving you a grant. And we're saying we're going to give you a customer. And that's just so important. So we're working on 2 pilot labs here in Atlanta that launched just a few months ago. We did a food security lab. 500,000 people don't have access to a grocery store in this city. 500,000 people do not have access to a grocery store in this city. They do have access to liquor stores. And that's a problem. Because when you go to a liquor store, you go to a convenience store and you say, hey, what if we put fresh produce and food in here? They're like, that's just going to spoil my beer. I don't want all that. And they don't hold it in there. It's a really big problem. And what we were able to do is to bring together a number of stakeholders that said, here's where the food access issue has been over the past 20 to 30 years. Here's where I think we need to be. And here are products and services that we would be willing to pay for. And we found 50 entrepreneurs right here in this city that had solutions to that problem. They had a product or a service that increased the supply or the demand of fresh produce or food in convenience stores and in local areas, or in actually having mobile markets that can go from one point to the other. These are things that people are already paying for, but we know that it's not working. So if you had a new idea on how to deliver those services to folks, we actually opened up a competition and are going to issue pay-for-performance grants to pay-for-performance contracts we have 12 entrepreneurs that are going through that process right now. We're very lucky that Georgia Tech's Carl DeSalvo with the Design Lab is actually going to help us create and design that process. So the second thing is South Downtown. South Downtown is an area that's not too far from here. It's where Underground Atlanta is currently. Recently, Underground Atlanta was just sold. And there was a 75-year deal on Underground Atlanta, and basically the city bought out the person who owned it, bought them out of their lease. And now they're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with this area of town where it used to be the center where everyone went, late 1800s, early 1900s. You went to downtown Atlanta to get jiggy with it, right? Like to really kick it, have fun. It's where you took your family. It's everyone we talk to remembers those really great memories of downtown Atlanta. It's fallen apart. Now we have folks who actually walk around downtown Atlanta, have a Grady Hospital band around their wrist because that's where they're going to sleep at night. We have folks who have been in that area for so long and have been displaced because of this development or that development. And it's frustrating to see our city fall apart like that, to really have parts of this city that are thriving and have other parts that are so historic that the home, the birthplace of Martin Luther King, that Martin Luther King Jr. Drive in Atlanta is in shambles. That's telling. So we've actually created a lab that says we know that Underground Atlanta is actually going to be developing whatever it's going to develop over the course of the next 6 to 8 months. And we actually are looking for ideas on what that area should be. This is an entrepreneurial opportunity. How do we shape a city that's fallen apart, a part of a city that's fallen apart that has so much history, so many assets? How do you bring it back to life? And we're going to be launching that lab next week. And I really hope that if you're into it, come participate, be a part of the process. Help us grow this thing. We need talent to start thinking about these problems differently. So I'm going to end with some key takeaways. Number one is that open data is a human challenge. All of this is impossible unless we actually have information that's coming in to support entrepreneurs in actually problem solving. If you start problem solving and we don't know if it's working or not, we'll never be able to actually grow from it. And the only places, the reason why government was the center of innovation for so many years was because they had all of the information. But now the people should have it, and the people are getting it. So we have to be the folks who are actually encouraging innovation and building innovation. And that's how it's truly going to, open data is the only way. It's the fuel to actually be innovative. The third piece is that fear of failure is the biggest barrier, that we can't try or test anything if folks are always saying it's just never going to work, I don't know, I'm scared, I don't want to do it. That you always got to break outside of those bounds and say, it's cool, I'm going to jump in and take a risk. And that can be inside of an already existing company, or that can be outside of a company. You don't have to be an entrepreneur in order to actually problem solve. You can do this inside of another company, and we've seen companies like Coca-Cola, like the United Way, folks who have been around for a long time reinventing themselves. The Atlanta Hawks are pretty awesome right now. Just wanted to put that out there. And then the last thing is that people with ideas, you, are city's greatest asset. Without people who are driving and who are committed to their city, we can't be innovative. It will always just be a buzzword. And I don't want that to happen to this city. So I'm very thankful for being here. I like to say that, you know, I've found some of the smartest, most talented people right here in this city. And I hope you'll stay because the city really, really needs you. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, we got time for a few questions.
Cool.
Hi, I have a couple questions for you. The first one is around the idea that you want the proliferation of open data and this creation of data that's accessible by everyone. And at the same side, you have companies like Brightscopes that you mentioned having tiers of purchasing that data or having access, granted only to those that can afford purchasing that data. What are your thoughts on that, that inequality that's created from being able to afford data in the first place?
I think a company like Brightscope shows us that open data must be the lowest barrier, that it has to be a standard. A company like Brightscope shouldn't have had to spend so much time trying to knock down those doors. And actually, cities are creating open data portals. We can ask that of this city. So if there are mass amounts of information that you want, sometimes public policy is an answer that allows you to actually mandate that every city agency should be opening their data and making it public. That's something that the center is taking a stance on because we think that that's one of the biggest barriers for innovation. Okay.
And for those of us that are considering, going on the entrepreneurial side and wanting to do things like these, what would be your one piece of advice in terms of coming to an organization like yours if we wanted help to do that?
Yeah. Know the problem that you're trying to solve. I think way too often people say, I'm an entrepreneur, I have skills, I know I can probably do good. They actually sometimes do the most damage. And because they try to find a business model in a social problem. We are focused on civic issues. So we really want to make sure that people have identified and done their research and looked at where that problem is. And also don't be afraid to say, I don't know. And don't be afraid to actually fail. The last thing I'll say about that is always pilot test and try your things. Understand who your customer is going to be and try things. And even if it fails, record what failed. Because that information itself is so valuable. And sometimes you can get funding just on the back of the fact that you were willing to fail and you had really great information come out of it. So I would just be really focused and also be not scared to fail. Thanks, man.
Hi, so I have a list of about 7 questions, but I'm going to go with
Perfect.
the most recent one.
All right.
So you were talking about your lab that you're doing for underground Atlanta.
Yep.
And I've been working in low-income communities in Atlanta for about 3 years now. I'm a trained city planner.
Great.
And I want to understand how you're so optimistic about how the results of your lab are going to actually go through, considering that there is this $25 million deal with the developer WRS, and then Mayor Reed also already has his ideas for what he wants to see happen there. So how do you think, or what personal connect maybe do you have with a developer that you think you're actually going to be able to implement this?
Fair point. Partners. That is the biggest asset that the Center for Civic Innovation has. The second the deal was announced, we sent a note out to WRS and we said, welcome to the community, so that they are not sending us that note 6 months from now. So we have actually already said that this is our community. We have the business owners and the folks who actually own the buildings in that community together as a cohesive unit that we call a catalyst group. And they were the foundation for this lab. So we actually invited Scott, who is from WRS, to the table, and we said, number one, can you tell us there will not be a Walmart here publicly? And he said there will not be a Walmart here. And number two, we said we can either be your friend or your biggest enemy. And the way we become your friend is that you work with the community that surrounds the South Downtown area and allow us to have a seat at the table. The way it doesn't work out is that you go about your plans without any sort of community input or buy-in. We got commitment from him that we will have a voice at the table, which is great, but that also means that puts the obligation and the onus on us to be well organized. So what happens often in these types of deals where folks are saying, I care about the community input, the community is so scrambled and not working together, and you know this probably through your work, that when they actually get to the table, there's no unified message or voice of this is what we really want to see. So we're actually applying the lab model to that process in order to say, we want downtown to be a place for innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. And these are the businesses we actually want to see thrive there. So a lot of it just comes down to you have to put your stake in the ground. You have to say that I have this whole community behind me. And that's why the community building piece has been so important. We have over 4,000 people who are a part of our community and have said we're willing to lend our voice to this. So that's been a reason why I think they're having that conversation with us. But I'd love to get you involved. It seems like you have a lot of great experience.
You made one comment that I thought was pretty intriguing, and that related to the fact that Atlanta was voted the least transparent city, I guess, in the country. But
yep.
I guess my question is, what would you attribute that to? You know, what is it really true that Atlanta is the least transparent, or is it just as untransparent as most other cities? But if it is the least transparent, what do you attribute that to, and what can you do through your organization to rectify that?
I think it really does, and not to harp on fear of failure, but like there really is if we put that information out there and people don't have the full story, they won't really be able to understand this data if we just put data sets out there. And I agree, open data for open data's sake is useless. So what we've actually said is let's actually target some key issues, and this is really important in the process. Let's target some key issues like vacant property and blighted space. We actually know, the city and many cities around the country don't know what they own, what assets and buildings that they actually have in their Rolodex. We can actually start to help. They want that information. You can build around an actual problem to say, hey, look, here are all the assets that the city actually owns. And that starts them saying, okay, we're willing to open that up to the public. And you can start to build on that types of information to make the process a little bit more participatory. So I think what we need to do is any issue that we target, we're making sure that we have all and a comprehensive list of the data that exists out there and that the city is an active participant in that.
But is it because Atlanta's cities systems are more antiquated than other cities? Is it a reluctance on the part of government officials to make this data available, or does the data just simply not exist?
Well, there are some departments if you go to in City Hall that would say absolutely not. My data will not be made public. Don't touch it. And they are the commissioners of these agencies. Other departments say I really want it to go out there, and they get slapped on the hand. Don't do that. So there is a bureaucratic loophole. The city of Atlanta just hired their first chief information officer, which is shocking. But that infrastructure that wasn't there before, but now that we have that, that's a huge asset to say, okay, can we start to get all of these different agencies on the same system so that we can actually make this stuff public without the fear of everyone being like, that's outdated, that doesn't make sense, what did you spend that for? And the city did make a commitment to an open data portal, it just doesn't exist right now.
I guess one final question, and that is,
Sure.
how can these students get more involved in Atlanta in terms of improving the efficiency of this government-private interface through social entrepreneurship? And also you mentioned your grants.
Yeah.
How can we be made more aware of what grants do exist and how do you apply for these grants?
So I think the first and biggest thing you can do is show up. That's what's not happening right now. And don't just show up once, keep showing up. Keep learning. If you really care about a part of the city or you care about a particular issue, make sure that you're actually going to the neighborhood planning unit meetings that are happening around that. There was a huge infrastructure bond there was a public meeting around $700 billion being spent. But I'd be shocked when we go to those meetings, folks aren't showing up. And it's not your fault. We need to do a better job of bringing that information to people so that you can start to get more engaged and involved. By coming to the center, and the center is in downtown Atlanta, I really want to make that an open house for you. Come in, ask questions, talk to the entrepreneurs, learn from them, talk to them, intern with them, really help them solve the problems that they're doing. There's a great entrepreneur that I want to, we don't care if you're nonprofit or for-profit. We're tax status agnostic, right? So what we really care about is what are you actually doing? So we have one entrepreneur who was a teacher for 11 years, was sick and tired of the way science and technology was taught in schools. He was taught the same way when he was a kid. When he was a teacher, he was forced to teach it a certain way. He quit his job, and he bought a food truck, gutted it, put a 3D printer on the back, and he posts up at failing schools across the city and teaches about the latest trends in science and technology. Test scores have gone up by 70, 80%, yet he doesn't have a business model. So he needs to figure out now, what if I had 20 trucks? How do I actually get there? That's an opportunity if you're looking to build a skill and you're looking to actually get engaged and involved. Partnering and working with organizations and startups like that will really help you learn what the ins and outs are and actually start to make a dent on an issue. On the for-profit side, if you've ever been to West Elm, they have these beautiful tables in the front that are just made really well, and people pay thousands of dollars for them. What a lot of folks don't know is those tables are made by a group called Lehman Luther. And Lehman Luther only hires homeless men and recovering addicts to build those tables. And they don't just pay back a living wage to those folks, they pay a thriving wage. They make sure people don't just get back on their feet, but that they're running. So there is a really amazing ability to impact the lives of other people by working with entrepreneurs. So just come to the center, be a part of what we're doing, and meet people who are changing the city and so on.
Rohit, thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today.
Thank
you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.